By better understanding how your brain functions, you can actually learn how to train it so that you can reliably work at your best. In today's episode, we'll discuss the default mode network, a set of regions of your brain that plays a key role in both distraction and focus. I'm Sharif Yunus with Dr. Kevin Majors. This is The Golden Hour. Sharif Yunus here with Dr. Kevin Majors, and we are here to discuss all things optimal work. Actually, just a couple things optimal work. So we want to focus today's discussion on what's called the default mode network, or the default mode, or predictive attention. Kevin, it goes by many names. What is it?
It's a very interesting neuroscience phenomenon that had escaped attention for like decades of people looking at the brain and how it works. And so it turns out that we have two different big systems of how we pay attention to the world around us or the world inside us. So one of those is called task attention, and it's how we pay attention to the things we're doing. It's also called the task positive network. So it's just to mean that when you're actually working on something, you can see certain areas of the brain light up. What took us a long time, and is still a story that is unfolding, so we are learning more and more about this every year, is what happens when you're not engaging a task, and particularly the times when you could say you're in your own mind, you're in your own thoughts, you're kind of lost. So if you think of a person watching television, if he's engaging with the show, you can see he's kind of tracking with the show, and you can tell. If he gets lost in his own thoughts, you see there's a blank stare. And then so now he's kind of disconnected from that. So we figured out what's going on in that blank stare. So when people...
So it's not nothing, your brain's not just dead.
It's not exactly. It's not like the brain's turned off. It's that now it's processing imaginary things instead of real things. So you have one set of attention for imaginary things, and that's called the default attention. And then you have another set for real things. So which is the things around you. So, and we often are straddling both of these. So the part of our attention, our conscious attention, you could say, the observing self, is kind of dealing with imaginary things, and part is dealing with the reality around us. And so people can flip back and forth between the two. So sometimes in conversation, someone tunes out, and now they've gotten into their head, so they have to get back into the present moment and refocus on the person they're with or on the task that they're with. So that is the big discovery, that we have these two different networks. One works more in the background, and one works in the foreground. One is about imaginary things and like the past and future, and then another is for the here and now. Pretty cool.
Okay. Yeah, that is cool. Okay, so you mentioned this thing of it sometimes pulls you out of the present moment if you're in a conversation, or I guess that happens to me sometimes if I'm watching a movie, and it's not really grabbing my attention, I'll just start thinking about work or a conversation in conversations.
Especially I'm getting ready. Yeah, you are. Getting ready in the morning, like in the morning is actually where you experience the most default attention at work. So when you're showering, when you're doing things, and you could just be in your head thinking about things, or you get a song stuck in your head. So all of that is default attention. And it turns out it does have a variation throughout the day. It tends to be greatest in the morning, and then it tends to weaken as the day goes on. I think probably just as we get used to engaging tasks, then it kind of turns off. But there is this variation stronger in the morning. So people try to have different periods where they're meditating or being silent. Often they notice there's much more noise in the morning than in the evening or afternoon.
I definitely notice that. You've gotten me into the morning run, and so I definitely notice on the morning run I tend to have lots of thoughts going on. But sometimes that's really helpful. Like sometimes if I'm working on something all day and I can't figure it out, sometimes you wake up and you start, and then it gets going a little bit, and you have the solution to the problem.
Absolutely.
Is that related to the default?
Yeah, I call that the re-entry benefit. So once you've gotten off your task attention off of a problem, then it goes and shifts, and now your default mode is working on it. But then when you like wake up in the morning, ideas come to you. Things have kind of been figured out in the background. And so at odd moments, then you get these new insights. So that's, or if you take a complete break from your work and then you come back to sit down, now you see new things. So there's your default mode does like help you to make associations. That's what it's doing. It's knitting together concepts and words and images to form associations, so that when you come back to the network and start thinking of something in particular, then you notice that all these connections have been made. That's what it does.
Cool. Well, so I guess, I mean, one of the reasons why we want to talk about this and learn more about it is because it helps us understand how our brain works so that we can actually work better, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it seems to relate to the question of how we focus in our work. And so it seems like understanding the default mode better is going to help us understand the way we work better and how to focus better, why we get distracted. So, yeah, I mean, related to this question, it's so common that you sit down to work and you just can't work at all because you're super distracted.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get lucky and you sit down and you have a great time at work. So what's the role of the default mode in those two outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's a very fascinating and constant real life application of this. So what does it mean to like have to put effort into getting work done? So this is an interesting question. Like, what is that effort? Why is sometimes it seems like it takes a ton of effort to sit down and make yourself do something, and other times it's just you dive in and it goes so smoothly. And what people perceive as effort in their attention is a lack of synchronizing between their task attention and the default attention. So they need to be in harmony with each other or synchronized with each other. So, and the way you do that is by your default attention has to be properly trained to know what are the steps of the task you're about to do. So this is why I prefer calling it predictive attention, because what's the purpose of it? Well, what it's trying to do is minimize effort for your task attention by getting as much ready for the next step in your task before you get there. So if you always go through things in a certain order, your default attention or the predictive attention knows exactly then how to pull you through. And you experience that pull as effortless attention. At its height, that's what's called flow. So flow is the perfect synchronization of default attention and task attention, so that you have deliberately, when I say deliberate, I mean task attention. So you've deliberately kind of set a course for your work, and then you, in a sense, automatically get that course facilitated. So it's just made easy for you. So it doesn't take away freedom. You can still choose to do other things. It just makes the ordinary path, the trajectory of the work you're about to do easier. So even if you're doing something that you haven't done many times, it's awesome to really envision it, to try to see it in your mind. So try to get this idea of what exactly do I want this task to look like, and can you lay out the steps in advance? So if you can do that, you'll be then easily able to like train your default attention so that it properly predicts the next step, and then it can kind of pull you through. And then attention feels effortless. So it's interesting, just a little bit of effort by your task attention before you start to lay out the task, try to see the steps of it and have it in order, actually then makes the entire task feel effortless. So that's the trade-off we're always trying to get people to do, is just to invest in their task attention,
Right.
program their default so that it can then pull them through the task.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, two follow-up questions. So one quick comment is that actually computers do a very similar thing, is that the way we've developed computer operating systems is that they're trying to actually predict the next thing you do, and they do calculations in advance when you actually do something to make the performance a little bit better. But so two questions. Okay, one is, so you want to break the task down into steps. How do you do that if it's something that you've never done before? And then, how do you, so if you don't really know like what the steps are, like, I just took up wood carving a little bit ago, and I have no idea how to do it. So I'm sure an expert knows, okay, yeah, first you do this, and then you do this. But I have no idea. So that would seem like, so how do I really approach that? And then kind of related is in your work, when you're working with people one-on-one, in as a psychiatrist, you're talking with people, but it's not like the conversation isn't going to go exactly according to steps that you plan at the beginning. So how are you training your default mode in those types of situations to work with you and not pull you out of the task?
Yeah, no, interesting questions. I think what the most simple example of the default attention at work is if you're trying to remember a name and it's not coming to your mind. Do you have any steps for how you remember names? Probably not. So, but what you do is you essentially put it aside. You stop trying to actively remember, and then it goes into the processing of your background attention, this default attention, and at some point, it just pops into your head. So, and the name comes back. So, but you didn't have steps for that, but what you had was, in a sense, a very specific intention that you really wanted to figure something out, to remember something, to do something. And that intention, the end you're pursuing, that's what gets your default attention to know the trajectory and to know what to work on, what memory to prime, and then it helps you. And so that's the way when you do creative work, say you're trying to write something. So you can't necessarily, when you're writing, you can do a little bit of planning. Like first I'm going to outline and then I'm going to, but at some point it's just a creative work and you can't exactly make all the steps for it. And sometimes you're trying to make new connections to see how can I say this or present this in a new way. And then you can't have steps, but you do have an end. And so it's kind of like if you're climbing a mountain and you know, like, okay, you keep in mind, you really want to get to the top. And that's your intention. Even if you hit a foggy patch and in the midst of the foggy patch, you see there's different paths going different directions. Well, it's the intention you have of getting to the top that gets you through that cloud. So you have to have an end in mind. What's the ultimate thing you're trying to accomplish? That end that you're ultimately desiring takes you through this cloud, the fog, what we call it sometimes the cloud of unknowing. So it kind of pulls you through it. So you at least have the direction you're wanting to go. And then you get better at getting there. And then you get another moment of clarity at some point. Just, okay, now I've gotten new ground. But that's the only way you can make progress in a sense in tasks that you've never done before or in ideas you've never fully explored or put together. So if you want to get somewhere you've never been, you have to take paths you've never taken. So you have to be thinking, but you do that because you have the direction in mind. So you have the ultimate question you're trying to answer. You try to keep that active and live, and then you enter the cloud.
And you might sometimes take wrong paths, and okay, yeah, that's not like the best for the outcome that you wanted, but then that's
you get better at
part of
climbing.
it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to learn also how to reset when you feel like, oh, actually, I'm not approximating my goal anymore. Okay, I'm getting off track here.
Right.
And especially if people are too attached to making progress and they're not really working with an end in mind, then they can get into traps where they just get the satisfaction of progress. And that's how distractions usually work. So people get a certain kind of, it's like they got into that cloudy, foggy place on the mountain and they found a really clear path. Turns out it was going down, but they just ran on it because they just wanted the satisfaction of motion.
Right.
So, and often that's what leads people into these tunnels or rabbit holes in their work, that they're not exactly sure how to proceed. And then they see, and then they just dive into a rabbit hole. And that's what leads to a certain sense of momentum as you're going, but it's not according to the original plan. There's no original strategy that they're enacting. It's not really deliberate, actually. Just to mention briefly, with patients, it's exactly the same. I have a certain overarching kind of goal, of the progress out, according to what they came to me for, trying to see how do they make progress in it. Great. And then you essentially enter a cloud where you're feeling your way through and trying to see where could you have the clearest lessons given, where could you make the best demonstration, so that they can see how, whatever the issue is, if it's anxiety or distraction, that they need an aha moment. And like, now I get how it works. And I'm trying to find usually the shortest path to that aha to flip their view of what's going on.
Right. And so you mentioned this thing of getting off track. So how does the default mode relate to that? So that's when basically when you commit to something that's actually not the best course of action. You gave the example of climbing a mountain and you have a nice trail, but it's actually not taking you up to the top. So is that when you've given your default mode a bad strategy or a bad sequence of steps, or you haven't given one at all? Or how does that actually, and what do we call that? Hyper focus, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're really working through a strategy, ideally, your default attention is able to prepare the next step and you get pulled to it, gently pulled. Doesn't take away your freedom. You're still deliberately aiming to get through the strategy, but it's just facilitated to be easy. But sometimes, especially if you're not sure how to proceed and you get this sense of uncertainty, you have to, when you feel uncertain about how to best make progress in a task, keep the end in mind. If you don't, you end up then sometimes just looking for a quick way of making progress. And that could be like, if you're writing a paper, it's like, oh, I just need to research this more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you go into some rabbit hole of like, okay, now I'm going to look up all these papers and I'm going to do all this research. I'm going to go on Wikipedia, whatever. So, and then that can be a deep rabbit hole. And so what happens is, while you're doing that research, it feels like you're making progress, but more and more, you're not really working the strategy. And it might be that you wanted to write this paper in 5 hours, and now you spent 3 hours in a rabbit hole. And so that's a sign of hyperfocus. That you get, it's not that there's like a deliberate plan being worked out. And in fact, you're kind of just being drawn along because one step leads to another. And often people say, it's like, yeah, there's one thing leads to another and they get pulled along. The worst kind of hyperfocus is tunnel vision. And what can happen is, let's say that, as absurd as it would be, you think, I need to do a little more research. And like, there's this one show on Netflix that will help me with my research.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to, and then you start watching it.
Yeah.
So the more like salient, the more pleasurable the thing that you're dealing with in hyperfocus, the more you really get into a tunnel and starts pulling you along. So, and that's, so tunnel vision is when there's some highly rewarding, highly salient thing you're paying attention to. And then it can pull you definitely to places you would rather, deliberately not go, but you just get pulled into it. So the whole problem of people having like impulses and automation and tunnel vision, the whole problem is that they hadn't properly trained their default attention, so that they weren't aware when they were entering the tunnel. That's a big problem. And so they didn't have this awareness of like, where am I? What attention am I using?
Yeah.
And so the better people are at forming strategies for their work, envisioning the climb of the mountain before they start it, the easier it is then for them to know when they're getting pulled off track. And so improving the way people work is where you train your attention system. Work is where you gain mastery in laying down the plans for your default attention. And that's how you overcome all issues of hyperfocus and automation. It's about learning how to set up your work well.
So now, you make it sound like it's kind of very much in your control, but we have the experience. I mean, I know people who think that they're more distractible than other people. And I think this is a common thing of being diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. Is there so now you're saying that actually there's something else going on that we can actually understand. It's not just
exactly.
You have this thing.
Well, so you mentioned ADHD. So when people take Adderall or Ritalin, what that essentially does is helps them to activate their task attention and deactivate their default attention. And so it does make it easier for them to stay on task, so that they're able to be engaging task attention more. The problem is it doesn't do anything to train their default attention to prepare in the background the next step. So when people are taking Adderall Ritalin, they could be getting into a good course of work and a good trajectory, but they could just as easily use all of that to go down a rabbit hole. So it like helps them to get momentum, but it doesn't necessarily give them strategies because that takes more deliberate training of the person. So it's an artificial increase in momentum, but it could lead to rabbit holes and hyper-focus, or it could lead to good work. But that might be why like stimulants have not consistently been associated with increased grades, like improved grades in school children.
That's
So you'd
interesting.
think that if it was the cure for attention issues, that grades would improve, because that's kind of like getting through the task successfully. No, it requires a strategy to get through a task successfully. And no medicine will train you in forming a strategy. But this issue of distractibility is simply, in my mind, a lowered switching threshold. So while you're on one task and you're working, your default mode will be preparing the next step. But it's going to be looking for whatever, like its past training, or it's going to look at whatever it has the most drawing power around you right now.
To know what the next step
To
should
know
be.
what the next step should be. And technically that's called salience. It's looking for the most salient next step. And a well-practiced strategy means that the next step of the strategy is most salient and pulls you to that. But if you don't have one, or if you reach an impasse in your work, the most salient next step could be Facebook, or it could be YouTube. And so that's what needs to be trained. So to be able to hold yourself to a course of an hour's work, deliberately intending not to switch no matter what, that's how you raise your threshold for switching. But it takes a commitment to a task, a commitment to do just this one thing for a certain period of time. Then you open up the ability to be aware of the urge of switching. So, and the more you can feel the urge to switch off task and still stay on task, that urge habituates. So it gradually goes away. And the next time is weaker, the next time is weaker. That's how you raise your threshold for switching tasks. But it really requires a commitment to only do this one thing for the next hour. If you don't commit to the task fully, then your task attention doesn't really get engaged. The thing that engages task attention is commitment, and it's a commitment that's deliberately made. So that's I think the real treatment for attention deficit is helping people to unitask, to commit to a task, and then training them in the ability to put their attention completely on the task at hand and to hold it there and to keep restoring it. And that's what mindfulness does. So mindfulness is actually a task with no steps. So there's nothing for your default attention to pull you to. So mindfulness just activates task attention and turns off default. So it actually does what a stimulant does. But mindfulness can do it without any drug. So you're just activating task attention by attending to one thing right now, and then turning off the predictive attention so it can work purely in the background. We say turning it off, really what it means is putting it into the background, where then it actually does more effective work.
So wait, mindfulness does what a stimulant does in the sense that it activates task attention, but it doesn't give you the same kind of momentum.
It doesn't. No. Yeah, with mindfulness, there's no momentum, but that's okay because the momentum has to come from the strategy being practiced, and you're just moving through the task in the best, most deliberately shaped way. So that's you want momentum to be deliberate and rational,
right?
Not chemical. So.
Right.
So
Sounds
not
like
to say that there's never a use. Yeah, it sounds like not to say there's never use for these meds, but I think that they should not be seen as a solution. Even though in certain cases it might be a temporary kind of helpful that you give people, but it needs to be in a broader context of training the person to really be able to to use their task attention to shape their default attention before they start working.
So it's a state of, how distractible you are, you're saying, is a state of training. And how long, if I have serious focus problems, how long am I going to have to train to get better?
Yeah, so I think
really to be able to do a full golden hour, say.
I think you start getting better right away, and there's no limit to growth.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, I have one last question, which is, I tend to blame my phone for distracting me.
Mhm.
Am I right to do that? I mean, how much is the modern technology kind of aggravating these problems?
Well, the phone does serve up an endless assortment of very salient things. So it's easy for your phone to be the channel by which the most salient next step as a
Hmm.
distraction gets delivered to you. So it's a really good idea that when you sit down to work, you put the phone then in airplane mode or in do not disturb, and you're committing to just work on this task and not use the phone. But ultimately, the phone, you can't, you know, your use of the phone is precisely like where growth takes place. So, and the problem is never the external. The problem is never just technology.
Hmm.
Really, it's the issue is learning how these new challenges like technology can bring out the best in you, and so and how you can actually grow the most in using them.
So you're saying the problem is me, not my phone.
Yeah,
Is that right?
precisely.
Is that
Yes.
okay? That's right. That's where I thought you were going with that.
Yeah, the problem is not the problem would be the approach to growth that would externalize it and say then we have to fix the externals. It's never about fixing the externals.
Hmm.
It's not like, it's not changing jobs, it's not getting rid of the phone, it's not, more powerful software to make sure you're not, I think the issue is always virtue and helping people to shape themselves in the most deliberate way that actually then is think like what would be the most beautiful way of responding to this
Yeah.
challenge.
Wow. Yeah, it reminds me, software engineers have a joke when someone reports a bug in your software. You never want to admit that it's your software is a problem. So you say uh, PBCAK, problem between chair and keyboard. So it's like the person's the
Exactly.
problem, not the software. But cool. Well, anyway, that's all the questions I have. Any last words on the importance of the default mode, Kevin?
Only to say that there's one, you can kind of tell, whether you're using pure task attention or the default attention. Because the default attention, because it's unreal, is always going to be words and images. So, and uh, task attention is always totally engaged with the present moment in the here and now. So, like if you're climbing a mountain and you get to the top, then at that moment, um, you could think about what it's like to be on top of the mountain and reason to yourself and meditate about it in your head and with words. And that would be one response. Or you could just behold it. So, and then just contemplate the scene, contemplate the beauty of it. So, and that would be when you're contemplating that is pure task attention. So, but if you're just thinking about it, meditating on it, then that would be using your default attention. So the transition is like, how do you then get fully into the present moment? But
And that's a much better experience
it
to
is,
just behold,
yeah,
right?
it's immediate, yes, because you can, you have your thoughts with you all the time, but you don't always
Yeah,
have this beauty to contemplate.
right. So it really opens you up to a new type of beauty being in the present moment.
Exactly.
Love it.
All right.
Um, awesome.
Until
Well, thanks so much. Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out OptimalWork.com for a set of online tools to help you engage challenge in your life. See you next week.